Before I do anything else, I want to make sure that I thank Nikesh Arora and his whole team for putting on this event. As you all know, Europe is a tremendous business for Google. And Europe has also turned out to be a great sort of laboratory for globalization for Google, taking a company which, of course, started off in California and now is very much a global company. And I also want to thank you all for spending the whole day with us. We've had a very busy day with YouTube announcements and, of course, the green technology and other important things that we've talked about today, and I want to highlight some of those. But I think the most important thing to say is that as a global company, we want to be here. We want you to be with us, and we want to talk about the interesting things going on at Google and at in the world as a whole. Now, I was trying to think about this in the context of where we are and in Paris, and I was thinking about the sort of history of American values, which thinking of the French ones that many of our values came from, liberty, equality, fraternity. And the Internet's open standards and protocols give everyone the freedom to connect. That's liberty. The web is democratized information. Well, that's equality. And fraternity, social networking, and the new things that YouTube represents are another example of this very, very powerful set of values that we Americans learned from you all. I always begin the day thinking about search. Search was and is, and I suspect will be for many years, the killer application. And in many ways, search defines the need, the human need for information. And we have more engineers working at Google on search than anything else. And of course, the web gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And as it gets bigger, you need a bigger index. You need more search. You need more solutions. Now, what's driving this underlying web growth? Well, of course, we have this tremendous web connectivity. Everybody knows it. You have 300 million broadband users. You have 150 million 3G users. Everything taking off here in Europe. Moore's law, which everybody here knows about. I like to think of Moore's law as a factor of 10 every 5 years, or a factor of 110. It's pretty phenomenal. So in 5 years, your strategy that didn't work with technology now works very well. There's a law called Kreider's law, which talks about the rate of improvement for disk drives. And those disk drives improving at doubling roughly every 13 months. This law is so powerful that, for example, in 2019, it'll be possible to have an iPod-like device that will have 85 years of video, and you'll be dead before you finish watching it all. So this gives you a sense of the power and the compounding, and it's just continuing. So this explosion of content, which is now measured in exabytes, is the task that Google has set out before us. And one way to think of it is that we're looking for more needles in larger haystacks. And Google itself is built on aha moments, things where people say, I had no idea, or I forgot. And each and every one of you has something that you learned or something that was very hard to find that somehow Google meant it, and you remember that Google had that, and that's why you kept coming back. And we understand that, and we want to make more aha moments in your language and in your culture in ways that make sense. Marissa talked a little bit about search and universal search and the integration that we're doing in search, and how important we believe it is not just so text information, but also things like radio and video and print and those sorts of things. The personal search is perhaps the next big phenomena. Each and every one of you knows more about what you want than anything else. And the best search is a personal search, one that you arrange, one that you specify, one that you control. And this is going to become more and more of a fundamental theme of Google as we go forward. Think of it a different way. I know what I want, and I know what I like better than anyone else. So the best search engine is one that I organize myself. We have a product called iGoogle, which again Marissa talked about, and iGoogle is exploding in its use. Surprising to me, I might add. But people love to customize it. They love to find all the different kinds of information that iGoogle can make available and use the data corpuses that Google has accumulated on our many data centers. I like to think of iGoogle as the ringtone for Google. It's literally, you hear it over and over and over again as people use search more and more definitively everywhere. So we're trying to close the gap between what do I want and what do I actually type. I mean, here we are in Paris. If I say to you, Paris is very hot, which indeed it is today, am I talking about Paris the city or Paris the lady who's in jail in California? Very hard for us to know, very easy to know if we know something about you or maybe where you are, or maybe your preferences or your language, or maybe you don't care about the young lady in California, or maybe you spend all your time worrying about her and other celebrity activities. It's up to you, and you can personalize it as you see fit. The important thing about what Google does is we're focused on end user choice. And I want to come back to this with your questions. The end user can opt in. You can turn off services when you don't like them. You can pause it. You can remove specific searches. You can delete all the searches that you did. You can even take your search history to another search engine. We make a commitment that we won't hold your data hostage. We won't hold you hostage. We'll let you switch. And somehow that works and people continue to stay. Of all of the search activities that we're doing, the one that I think has the greatest promise worldwide is cross-language translation. Wittgenstein said, the limits of my language mean the limits of my world. And we all know that most people in the world do not speak English, although if you're an English speaker, it seems like everyone does, but it's really not true. Google operates in 112 languages worldwide, including 5 languages that we made up ourselves. And there are a lot of different languages. For example, there are 4 in Spain. Europeans know this. Many people do not. There are 14 languages in India. Sometimes people think there are actually more than 14. Let's look at books. There are 1 million books in the Alexandria Library. Only 1% of those books have ever been translated from the Arabic, because this is the Alexandria Library in Egypt. The entire history of 5,000 years of civilization not been translated outside of their own language. Now we can do it. And again, one of our goals is to do that. When we expand our search and we think about search and search as a defining activity, and we think about making the index bigger and more content, the next big activity is bringing in information that wasn't there before. We're working with publishers, for example, the New York Times, the Guardian in the UK, the New Scientist, a few others, to get their archives brought in. If you type, for example, Suez Canal, you'll find articles from the year it opened, which is 1869. And this may not be a question that each of you asks every day, but there are people who care a lot about going to the original sources because it matters to them, and we give it to them, and that's their aha moment, which is so fundamental to their experience. In books, we're doing partnerships now with leading libraries in Ghent, Munich, Madrid, Barcelona, Lausanne, the Bodleian Library, and as a result, we're digitizing French, German, Spanish, English, and Dutch books. This is good progress, but we're not done. There are a lot more books that we haven't digitized yet that we're working on. We have books in over 90 languages already, including in Oxford, we're doing more than 1 million books. So this is proceeding, right, with all of the impacts that it might imagine. So the next stage of search and the platform that Google has built is to think of us in the context and users in the applications that they use that combine search. People have the same needs and wants everywhere in the world, and on the internet there's a simple rule. People have a lot to say, and they're going to say it. Markets are viral. People spread information virally now, very different model, and information spreads through communities, back and forth and back and forth. And Google is very much like the weather. It's always there. Can't live without it, we hope. The important point is that we think there's an opportunity to take this platform and solve new problems. Can you imagine if most of the applications that you used worked as simply and well as Google itself did? This would be a huge change. The tagline we're beginning to use is search, ads, and apps. Because we think there's a set of applications, which indeed Google has announced and you all are using in some form, which we think can benefit from an integrated search on top of this powerful platform. And we've been looking a long time for the killer application, the mythical killer app in our industry. And I'm now convinced that the best application in the world is the one that everyone contributes to. If you look at YouTube, for example, today is a lot of focus on YouTube. YouTube grows because people contribute into it. They contribute to it. That's why it's so powerful. We're not making the content, we're hosting the content, we're searching the content. It's the users that generate the content and drive the community so strongly. And now, of course, internationally as well. Another interesting area has to do with phones, right? If every phone has a camera and every phone has a GPS, and there are more cameras than there are digital cameras, by definition, every computer is a phone, is a camera, and is a GPS device. This is pretty interesting. All of a sudden now, we're going to have a new platform, and that platform is going to be the combination of your application, not just on your PC, on your Mac, but also on your mobile phone. And here in Europe, which has always been a leader in mobile phones, you all know this because of the spread of the 3G networks that we in America lust after. An example is that in the last 6 months, Google announced a product called Google Calendar, which is now the #1 calendar on the web. Now you sit there and you go, calendar, what's a calendar? Well, the answer turns out to be that calendars had never been designed to be shared. And our calendar is so successful because it's so shareable. So the insight that we learned from the feedback and from the testing is that this new generation of apps is designed for sharing. It's designed for collaboration, and it's trivially shareable, trivially collaborating by its very nature. Many of you are, in fact, blogging or part of organizations that have blogging, and blogging is another key phenomena here. Blogging, the best analogy here is diaries, right? The diaries have been with us for hundreds and hundreds of years. Well, blogging is just a new form of that, and an important one. We search those, we index it, we make it easy for you to do it, and we promote them because we think it's important to hear what people have to think. Same thing with maps, right? The ability to contribute and annotate maps. We have people who are now building maps where maps were never made before. It's part of our whole Google Earth and Google Maps project. And again, the people on the street know what the map should say and what it should do. We talked about YouTube. The sum of this is really based on a new architectural model, which I'll call cloud computing. And the easiest way to think about cloud computing is it's a new way of organizing your information. Take the information that's traditionally locked in a PC, and instead put it on a server. And the simplest example that I can offer for you is, anybody here ever drop your PC? Break your hard drive? It's like a serious crisis. It's a really bad day when you drop that. Well, can you imagine if Google had all that information? You would get your new hard drive or whatever, it was all there and so forth. Here's another example. Soon it'll be possible to walk up to a computer like this one, type in a couple of commands, and have it become mine. Call it the Be Mine command. And everything on that computer all of a sudden looks like my computer, securely, safely, without any question of theft or anything like that. And then when I'm done, I can say, be gone, right? And take my information off of it and so forth, because it's so connected to the network. Now, all of this defines a new model which is viral in the way communication occurs. Person to person, device to device. So the way to think about the information spread is it's no longer centralized host and publish and so forth. It's really person to person, phone to phone. So in the future, what will happen is you will write an article and you'll type it on your mobile phone and you'll ship it over to her, and she'll read it and she'll say, I disagree, and she'll send it to him and he'll say, I disagree with both of you, and then he'll send it to 5 more people. That viral spread is a fundamental shift in how applications are going to be built and how information will be shared. And of course, from Google's perspective, more information means more sharing means more searching means more Google. Now, on the advertising sides, we're unusual in that we've taken a very, very straightforward position about ads. We think they're valuable. We think that ads are information. Indeed, in YouTube, not only are the ads information, you can click on them, but you can also annotate them, you can rate them, you can rank them, you can create networks around them, you can talk about them and say, this is a great ad, this is a terrible ad. Can you imagine all the people who think they know what people think, and now you can actually see what people really think about ads? So these sort of pay per action ads are very interesting. You charge only when the user buys, fills out a form, or other advertiser specified action. The advertising industry, by the way, is a huge industry. It's not been, it has had relatively little automation, relatively little engineering applied to it. So in a situation where there's increasing audience fragmentation, we think Google can help with the problem in a number of ways. We can bring print, radio, and television advertising within the reach of small companies. Historically, those markets are very difficult to penetrate. We can provide more automated and efficient tools that make all of that happen. But if you take a look in radio, huge partnerships now where we do targeted radio ads down the demographic area. Google is now doing various forms of trials in television, both in Europe as well as in the United States, where we're doing essentially targeted television ads. And those targeted television ads are likely to perform better because they're going to be more relevant. So the same principles that have done so well for us in the web text world are likely to work well in the advertising world. I want to finish up and get to your questions with a couple of comments. I think that perhaps the most important thing to emphasize here is that we do not do this ourselves. Partnerships are key. Partnerships are incredibly important. Last year, rough calculation, we gave more than $3 billion of revenue to partners. Last quarter, the quarter that ended in March, looks like we gave more than $1 billion in revenue to partners. Gave, shared, what have you. We jointly did it. The numbers are large, and the numbers are increasing dramatically. The best partnerships are one where you share in revenue, and indeed we're doing that. Why do we do this? Well, these partnerships bring in lots and lots of help. They bring in salespeople. They bring in strategic partnerships. They bring in marketing dollars. They bring in a global footprint. They bring in access to all sorts of interesting players. I was looking to some interesting ones that you might not have heard of. In Google Maps, Pagine Giale in Italy, Thompson in the UK, and Yale in Spain, working with us in Google Maps. Analogous to those groups are people and individuals doing Google Transit maps, who then contribute that as part of their partnership with Google, and over again. We are going to be successful because of the partnerships. We would not be successful without the partnerships. I think there are a lot of challenges ahead. There are challenges of growth, there are challenges of policy, challenges of society. But I do know that the future will definitely happen. It'll happen in a very interesting way. Some of the challenges that are interesting that I wanted to highlight. What are the next billion people who are going to come online going to do? Are they going to democratize the web? Are they going to bring new languages? Are they going to bring more tribalism, more globalism? I don't really know. But I do know that they're going to come. And they're going to test existing power structures. My favorite current example is that there's a television station in Venezuela called RCTV that was banned by the president of Venezuela, Mr. Chavez. And it turns out that this particular television station survived by publishing on YouTube. Pretty interesting. Pretty important, I think, for the people of Venezuela. How in this new world, with all these people coming on, how are they going to remain so powerful? How are they going to remain? Are they going to become, are they going to lose their identities? Are they going to become just the great unwashed masses of people? Or are they going to remain even more interesting communities? What is left of our privacy in an always documented world? My suggestion, for example, if you look at what's happening with teenagers in the online communities, is that at the age of 21, it should be possible just to change your name. You know, just sort of say, that wasn't me. I didn't do any of that at all. What happens as it becomes more and more important to have access to the internet to the people who really don't, right? Are we creating a new haves and have-nots? And it's a big societal issue and one that we all want to work on. But I do believe that the very best approach is to be open and transparent, to invest locally in many, many different countries, which indeed we're doing here in Europe, and to have a commitment to partnership, which is indeed what Google is doing. It is a certainty that we will get more people online and more quickly, even in the poorest parts of the world. And for them, it's a big day. It's a very exciting message. So when I travel, and of course I travel a lot now because of Google's global footprint, I was thinking about what is the metaphor that I hear a metaphor that I think carries my experience, and I'll simulate it. Yes? A mobile phone. And that was my joke, by the way. The numbers about mobile phones are phenomenal. 2.3, 2.4 billion mobile phones in use today. It took 20 years to get 1 billion, 4 years to get to 2, another billion in the next 3 years. These are phenomenal numbers. Let me do this again. We'll try it again. Lots of mobile phones. That's my other joke. The principle that I want to leave you with respect to globalization and information and Google is that everybody wants the same thing. When I travel, I'm really struck by, from the poorest to the richest, everybody wants a safe society, better education for their kids, a safe world, economic opportunity, clean water, all the kinds of things that we're so fortunate to have here. We have a real potential with the power of information to get that kind of ability, information to them even more quickly. It's a great time to be part of the world and be part of Google. So thank you very much. Let's see. Now, Rachel, you wanted me to do some questions? Yeah, we have time for questions and comments. We have a. Did you want to use microphones? Okay. Yeah, we'll get the mics ready.
Good afternoon. Darren Waters from BBC News. Two very quick questions. One, if I may, do you have a reaction to the stepping down of the Yahoo chief executive? And the second one is, privacy is an issue that doesn't seem to be going away with Google. What can you do, and what can Google do to reassure people that their privacy remains a very important protected right when they're online and using Google?
Two separate questions. With Terry, Terry and I started at the same time, and we got to know each other really well. He was an outsider to the industry, and many people said that when he joined the industry, he would not be successful. And in fact, he was remarkably successful in his leadership of Yahoo. And what's funny was that we would talk to each other because we both, even though the companies are competitive, we understood that we were growing the market. He's a valued friend and a person who really did an extraordinary job at Yahoo. I am sure that the people at Yahoo will miss him, right? I mean, just a phenomenal leader. And you can see why he was so successful in his previous job when you look at how well he did at Yahoo. It's really, really remarkable. With respect to privacy, there is a general concern about privacy in the online world, and I think it's largely legitimate. We're extremely sensitive to this issue because everything at Google is done based on how end users believe things are. And if people become, if they start to not trust Google because of personal privacy, individual privacy, then we've got a problem. Because they're literally one click away from switching to some other service. So everything we do is gated by that. So the most recent example, and I think people in the room know this, in conversations with the European Data Commission, data privacy initiatives, we settled on an 18-month cookie retention period. So essentially, after 18 months, everything is forgotten. It's a balance of interest, but it seems like a very clear answer that's how long we know information about you. And the interesting thing, by the way, is that as far as I know, Google is the only company that said that precisely. Again, trying to be transparent. So I don't think privacy issues are going to go away. They're central to what people's concerns are, and we spend a lot of time thinking about them. The 18 months is a good example of this.
Come from TV Movie Magazine. Hello. You talked a lot about partnerships, and you yourself are joining the board of Apple and talked about potential partnerships between that company and Google. Could you give us some examples, like iPhone with Maps, Google Maps, or something like that?
I think what you're really asking is you're asking to see my iPhone. Okay, so this is my iPhone. You could take a picture. The reason I know about the iPhone is that the iPhone has Google Maps on it. and it's stunning. And the iPhone is a powerful new device, right? And that category is going to be particularly good for the kind of applications that Google is building. Remember I said search, ads, and apps, and I think the iPhone is an example of it. The interesting thing about the iPhone is that there will be many other products that will come along that will also be able to run these apps. And so it's nice that Apple is one of the innovators there. I don't want to announce anything else, but you should expect other announcements between the two companies over time.
Yes. Sorry for my voice, but I want to make a question. If you talk about the case of Venezuelan TV, and you said that the TV that Chavez has closed is still living in YouTube. Would you remove if Mr. Chavez asks you for?
The answer for these sorts of questions is every case is different. The YouTube rule is that we must operate under the national law. So if there is a law which is written, and by the way, laws have to be written down, by the way, which is legal, binding, and so forth, and under that set of scenarios, we would look into it. And if we felt that this thing was a huge violation of some law, then maybe. But we'd look at it on a case-by-case basis. The laws about video and expression differ by country. I think in the particular case you're describing, the answer is probably not, but I would have to look at the specifics.
Hello, I'm Gunhild Haugnes. I'm a journalist from Aftenposten in Norway. I wonder if you know the Norwegian search company Fast Search and Transfer, and if you do you consider them as a big competitor or perhaps want to buy them?
Well, I can't comment on buying them. I do know the company. They seem like a very good company, and if they're a competitor, they're not a large competitor.
Present Ukrainian newspaper, and I have questions. Then is possible wait for detailed photo map of streets of Kiev.
Is it possible to have a map of the streets of Kiev? As far as I know, we're working on it.
Thank you. Danny Sullivan, Search Engine Land.
Hi, Danny.
Hi, Eric. A question on relating, you talked about partnerships. You just had eBay pull all their ads in the US because you're conflicting with your biggest advertiser and trying to run the checkout payment system against them. And this is the first time I can recall that Google's ever done that kind of a thing where you changed your mind about a big party and a promotion you were going to do because a big advertiser basically seemed to say, if you don't do this, we're not going to advertise with you. So can you comment more on, are you going to be open to these kinds of influences from other big advertisers, or does that change how Google goes forward?
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with all the facts as you stated them. eBay and Google have had a long partnership. They're a huge advertiser, as you pointed out, with us. We are somewhat competitive in the PayPal versus checkout space. And there's sort of this complicated set of conversations that are always going on. When we sort of looked at what the event that eBay was really doing, we decided that it really wasn't appropriate to have the event as proposed. And so we just canceled it. And eBay was happy with that. eBay is still a major advertiser, so it's not that they stopped advertising or anything like that.
Eric, Gavin Haycock from Reuters. What advice would you have for Jerry Yang? And second question, there have been numerous reports about News Corp and AOL being interested in doing deals with Yahoo if they got out of search. Has Google had any talks with Yahoo about the possibility of joining forces on search while competing in other areas?
Under American law, which I'm governed in Paris, I can't really comment about those sorts of conversations. Even if they had occurred, I couldn't comment. If they haven't occurred, I can't deny them. So I can't answer that part of the question. I'm sorry. I think it's presumptive of me to give advice to Jerry, who I've known for 15 years. He's a very, very sharp guy, and he knows what he's doing. I'm sure he'll figure it out. So I don't think it's appropriate for me to try to give him advice. He's been there much longer than I have.
Hi, Eric. Eamon McGrain from the Irish Times. We hear a lot of talk of Google gearing up to go head-to-head with Microsoft in the application space. So what kind of comments have you got on that?
Head-to-head with?
Going, in head-to-head with Microsoft in the application space, like the Word, the Excel.
I keep saying we're not doing that, and no one believes me. So the answer is no. How's that? If you look at Google Apps, they really do something which is pretty different from the traditional Microsoft apps. And the easiest way for you all to do that is start using them, and then you can judge what they're good for and what they're not. We don't position them as competitive, and we think it's a different paradigm. We think it's a sharing paradigm where you have data that's in the cloud and personal information that you can manipulate. We think it's a new phenomena and a different set of users.
Vincent Andriessen from the Dutch newspaper Financiële Dagblad. As I understand, the iPhone will contain some Google apps, some Google applications. Will it contain new applications that we're not aware of so far? And as I understand, there will be developed more applications for the iPhone. Can you comment on that one?
I really can't comment about Apple or the iPhone except for what's already on it, which is this amazing Maps product that I just already mentioned.
Hello, Alan Williams from PC Pro.
Hi.
Just returning to the privacy question, Google as a global company obviously covers a range of countries, and drilling down on that EU decision recently, isn't there always going to be a conflict that national specific data retention policies potentially conflict with Google's global regime? Like within the EU, the UK, for example, has its own Data Protection Act, which might have particular details. How can you possibly observe every nation's details in that way?
That's exactly the staff meeting we have. How can we possibly deal with the 200 different countries and their language and their rules? So, for example, there is speech that's illegal in Brazil, which is legal but hateful in the US. So are we governed by the Brazilian law or are we governed by the US law? And the answer is both, and we have to sort that out. So again, when the lady asked earlier, we do it on a case-by-case basis. And I mentioned the 18 months. We believe that that is a reasonable compromise between the various legislative bodies on that side. But there are many, many other people who are trying to regulate aspects of online privacy, and it's always in our interest if they become more standardized, because we obviously want to be law-abiding.
Maya Palmer from the Financial Times, but also on the subject of privacy, two questions. One is that you talked about the 18-month compromise, although I think there are some indications that the EU Working Party might not be happy with that. Would you be willing to go lower than 18 months? And then the other question...
Can I just answer the question? We will follow the law. First answer. Go ahead.
So if they were to demand lower than 18 months, you would be happy to follow that?
If it is the law, then we will follow it.
Okay. Secondly, how many people are using the Google personalized search, and could that be a way out of the dilemma? Because if you had enough people opting in on this, then you could just use their data and erase it immediately for the rest of them.
That's a clever idea. I don't know the precise answer, but it's growing very, very quickly because people like it because they get to be able to refer to previous searches and search against them. But as a policy, I think it's easier if we have a simple policy like the one I said. And obviously, it'll be influenced by however the law comes out.
Steffi Handler from Yediot Ahronoth daily newspaper from Tel Aviv. You speak about the Be Mine command, and you say it will be available soon, so I can have my computer on almost any computer thanks to Google. Can you give us more details? How soon will it happen? And concerning privacy, it might be very problematic. It's not just a cookie, it's my whole computer.
As I said, I was giving it as a metaphor, not as a specific product announcement, of what will be possible that once the information is in the network, it'll be possible to go to a computer and get your information on it. There are obviously details. You have to make sure you anonymize the cookies. You have to make sure you have an appropriately secure transaction. You have to have correct protocols, encryption, and so forth, all of which is either in development or already available.
Yes, hi, Hannu Järvinen from Tietokone Magazine, Finland. Still more about the privacy issue and the 18 months time which you use to store the information. For example, my personal information regarding my Google searches and activities is probably stored in some US-based server, right? So would it be possible for US government officials, for example, to have access to that information if they deem it appropriate? Or is it governed by, when you say you follow the law, which law in this case?
It's a much more complicated legal question than you might imagine. It's not obvious that that information is in the U.S. It might very well be here in Europe, in which case you'll be covered under a different set of laws. And that stuff has to get rationalized. In principle, it is possible for the U.S. government to get information about searches, but in practice it's essentially impossible because of the process that they have to actually go through. So in fact, it's not been an issue.
Currently, but if the situation changes somehow, if the policies changes, you are not the first to destroy all the information so that they wouldn't be accessed by those who shouldn't have the access.
I'm sure we would evaluate our policy as the laws changed.
Yes. Claude Soula, Le Nouvel Observateur. I have two questions. First one is, when and how will YouTube be profitable for your company?
YouTube.
Yes, YouTube. And the second one, now that the French library has a new chairman, are you trying to do something with them?
Yes. In fact, there's a meeting today with the French library to have a further conversation. I don't know the details of where they are in their conversations. We're having a lot of conversations with them right now. With respect to YouTube, we have focused YouTube not on making large amounts of money, but rather having a large audience base. We've looked at YouTube, and it's growing so very quickly, and it's such a large proportion of online video that we believe that we can eventually make significant amounts of money just from all the usage, and there are various clever ideas that we have. We're doing experiments around pre-roll and post-roll, various in-place ads on search pages and result pages and things like that. And it looks like it will be ultimately become a very, very successful business for us. Right now, the focus on YouTube is user happiness, user traffic, building a stronger community, and they're doing a tremendous job. And by the way, that's why such a big focus to come here to announce a big international strategy, because so much of the world is international video traffic.
Hi, Tony Rusko, Google Blogscope. Philip Lenson, who's back in Germany, would like to know what lessons Google have learned through implementing self-censorship in China, and whether there's anything you would have done differently?
The China conversation inside Google was the hardest decision we have ever made. It's a decision that reasonable people in this room, for example, might disagree on, right, given the trade-offs. We faced a choice of, because the Chinese have this thing which is called the Great Firewall, which they never acknowledge, where they can block entire facilities and so forth. So we faced a choice of not being available at all or following their local law. When we evaluated that, we decided to do it, we decided to enter the market, which is the right decision in my view, but we also decided to put no user-specific information in China. So the kind of things where you have personal privacy and the Chinese law allows them to do lots of interesting things with that information. You just can't be done with Google information. And we think that that's the right trade-off for Google and for the Chinese citizens. Our China traffic and China business is booming right now. So it looks like the strategy is working. My only regret is we should have done it much sooner. But it just took this long for us to figure out what the right sort of Google value-based answer was.
This is Thomas here on your right. Thomas Kuhn with Wirtschaftswoche, German Business Weekly. We've heard so much things about where Google can go and what Google can offer to the world, and you're so kind to everybody that everybody can use it for free, and the whole business model is based on advertising, of course. We're seeing a great shift from traditional media to the internet, but have you ever started thinking about that there might be an end of that shift and where Google should be going, could be going, and it could be making money in a further out step, saying 5 years or 10 years ahead?
We have, and that's why we have a business called Google Enterprise. And the Google Enterprise business started off selling these yellow boxes that were servers inside of companies and doing hosted search for companies. Google Enterprise is now doing something called Google Apps for your domain, and generally known as Google Apps. And for $50 a year, we will provide 10 gigabytes of storage and hosted service and service level guarantees and so forth for small businesses, universities, and whatever. In fact, for universities, they typically are free. That business is likely to become, over the period you're describing, a very significant business for Google because it's a perfect leverage point. It uses our infrastructure, it uses our scale, that kind of stuff. Before I finish answering your question, I should say that the advertising business is a very large business, and we are a very small percentage of it. Last year, our revenue was on the order of $10 billion US. Estimates of the worldwide advertising industry are 800 billion US, half in the US, half outside the US. The biggest countries are France, Germany, the UK, China, and Japan. So the advertising business is a big business. We're still at the beginning of what we can do in it, and we don't see any limits. So there's no, I want to make sure that you hear, we love the advertising business. It's 97% of our revenue, and it's going to remain a very high percentage for many, many years.
Over here. Victoria Shannon at the International Herald Tribune. Could you talk a little bit more precisely about why YouTube and Google have this new emphasis on international growth in terms of real business reasons? Is it because growth in North America is slowing? And the other part of that is it relates to the idea that borders really do matter on the internet, unlike people thought maybe 5-10 years ago. You could talk about that.
I'm not sure this is a new focus for Google. We have a couple thousand employees in Google in Europe. As I mentioned, Nikesh and the team are growing revenue very rapidly. We have what is apparently high market share in most of the countries. We're very, very, very successful in Europe. If anything, we lagged in our expansion in Asia. Again, that was addressed by the China issue, which I previously answered, but we were very successful in Japan, for example, and we're now focusing in India and so forth. So I don't agree that this is a new emphasis. I think it's an ongoing emphasis. My own emphasis has been to deal with the so-called second-tier countries, the ones where the languages, we didn't have full language coverage and things like that. But certainly the major languages have been covered for a long time. In YouTube's case, YouTube's a startup, and many startups in the US start with a US-only presence simply because it's such a large market. And the moment we acquired YouTube, I told Chad and Steve, get yourselves on an airplane, fly to Europe, fly to Japan, fly to China, and go visit and figure out, is there anything special, is there anything different? Do you have local competitors, that kind of thing? And indeed, they've done that, and this day is the results. I don't know that this is a new emphasis, but it's a continual emphasis. Some other statistics, I don't know the exact numbers, but somewhere between 20 and 30% of our traffic is from the United States. The rest is from the world. The percentage of revenue from Google is less than 50% internationally, but will soon become majority 50%. Soon it'll become majority non-US revenue. Probably this year, maybe next year, but it increases every quarter at whatever, so very soon. So very soon it'll be possible to say that the majority of our business is outside the United States. And you'll need to help me with the point about internet borders. I'm not sure. It's important. One of the things I always say to the people who work at Google is, it's important to remember that we are actually subject to the laws of the countries that we operate in. And so anybody who thinks that somehow the internet is borderless hasn't been paying attention to people going to jail. And we have to pay attention to their laws. We have to work with the governments. We have to understand the cultural sensitivities. We don't have a choice, nor should we.
David Smith of the Observer newspaper in the UK. Were you surprised by the strong reaction to your recent remarks about maybe one day Google will be able to tell you what to do tomorrow, or what job you should be looking for, and also the reaction to Google's acquisition of a company interested in genetics. And can you understand why some people find all of that slightly sinister? Not even in the sense that it might all be handed over to the government one day, just purely that for any corporation to know too much about you might be dangerous, and perhaps there are worries that sort of once nice people like you and Sergey and Larry are gone, then there might be slightly less people in charge. And secondly, just on the China point...
Can I just answer the first part?
Sure.
We did not, in fact, buy a company in the genetic space. The company is invested in a company called 23andMe, which is doing interesting information, which maybe will be possible to get that kind of information with your permission more broadly known. We think that more information is good as long as you're participating, as long as it's what you want. So I don't think that's a negative. With respect to the other comments, I'd rather not comment on the press reaction because the stuff was done out of context anyway. It may be easier if I say what I said at the time. Google is not at all done with your information problems. Because today you have to sort of figure out what queries and look, and I'm still thinking about this quote I wanted to read and I can't quite remember it and I can't figure out the words, and Google cannot answer that question. There's many, many examples where it would be nice if Google had more of an ability to understand time and choices. So the example that I used was, which college should I go to? Okay. What should I do tomorrow? Any suggestion? And it will be some years before we can at least partially answer those questions. But the eventual outcome is if you will, an institution or a set of computers that really can answer more of a hypothetical question. And I don't see that as bad as all. I see it as helpful. And again, the important principle, and I want to say this over and over again, is this is user choice. This is opt-in. None of this, you don't want it, doesn't have to do it. You don't have to ask those questions, and we're not going to torture you to do it. Second question.
You've announced today about leveraging assets to try and influence public policy on climate change and environment. Have you been, or do you intend to do exactly the same with issues of censorship in China and other countries?
We have tried. We actually believe that Google's presence, even in a somewhat repressive political climate, opens up the dialogue. If you look, for example, in China, and without commenting on the specific laws, the fact that everyone can now blog and talk about what's going on, even with limitations, has in fact changed the communication dialogue from our perspective in a positive way. More communication is good, more blogging is good, more user-generated content is good. And you know, I look forward to a time when YouTube is full of videos of what's really happening in the world, as opposed to what other people are telling us. And again, if you go back to my earlier point about every mobile phone has a camera, every camera has a GPS, therefore every camera has a GPS and has a mobile phone, and let's imagine that they have an upload to YouTube button. Wouldn't it be interesting to see what's actually going on in the world, as opposed to what the various stakeholders are telling us?
Could you put pressure on the US government to...
I'm concerned about your using the word pressure, because we are not a country. We don't have any nuclear bombs. Right? We're not an elected, we're just a company. And the word pressure bothers me. I don't know that that's an appropriate rule. Maybe lobby, certainly lobby for the principles of openness is something that we can do. I would be sensitive to the sort of tough words that you're using, because I don't think they're appropriate for a company like Google.
Eric, hi, James Ashton from the Daily Mail. I just wondered, as you grow bigger and bigger and expand into more areas, are you worried or sensitive towards this idea of a consumer backlash that afflicts a lot of big corporations like Microsoft and so on? And secondly, I was just curious, you've got so much cash on the balance sheet at the moment. Is that all for acquisitions, or what do you plan to do with it?
So with respect to the question of Google's size, we thought a lot about this because we're sensitive to this question, you know, how are we perceived? And the conclusion we came to is that as long as we're making decisions based on what end users want, we will be fine and we'll accept the outcome. So as long as we continue to execute and as long as we serve our end users, and again, going back to this thing I said earlier, we're one click away from our end users going to somewhere else, and we'll make it easy for them to switch. So we think that the pressure that we apply on ourselves is a good, if you will, break on whatever poor things that other people might think we might be likely to do, because we're clearly not going to do it because it would violate our user contract. Sorry, and your second question? The cash, the cash, yeah. Successful, fast-growing companies like Google who don't have large manufacturing plants tend to generate cash. And if you look in American companies of a certain scale, they tend to be cash flow positive. We've been fortunate that we've been cash flow positive since I've been in the company. And there's no signs of that going away. So while it's true that the cash can be used for acquisition, I think in most cases it ends up piling up. And we've already announced that we're going to spend $3.1 billion of cash to purchase DoubleClick when that's ultimately approved later this year.
Hi, it's Rudy Rosenberg with Bloomberg News. I was just wondering if there's any backlash in Europe from the Brussels court decision in February, whether you've had talks with any other newspapers that are concerned about you linking their news, and whether you would consider another model, possibly an ad revenue sharing model with these newspapers that have these concerns. Thank you.
The particular lawsuit and the particular complaint was actually resolved quite amicably, and indeed the AFP and the other deals and conflicts have all been resolved. So I think those issues are behind us. And indeed, most of the newspapers seem to be very happy with the amount of traffic that we're sending them, because when we send them the traffic, then they can do ad rev share based on that. So it doesn't seem to be an issue right now. Yes, hi.
You mentioned an interesting way that some of your youngest users, the 21-year-olds, are dealing with privacy issues by perhaps changing their identities online. And I was wondering whether, the under 21-year-olds, the newest generation coming up, who've never known a world without Google really, and don't know it as ever being a hip young company, kind of only know it as the incumbent behemoth. If you have any specific strategies for making sure to retain the top position in their minds.
Again, I'm not sure I agree with the premise of your question, especially the word incumbent behemoth. How about company that delivers greater value to the teenager than the other choices, and the teenager, if they don't like it, switches? Again, somehow there's this model in your question that I just don't agree with. Every teenager has a choice, and we're glad that they're choosing Google. And trust me, having watched a lot of teenagers do this, they'll switch very, very quickly if we don't do a good job. And so the answer is no, we don't have a special strategy.
Holger Schmidt, FAZ in Germany.
Hi.
And one actual buzzword on the web is IPTV, posted by companies like Juiced. What are your plans in that field? What are you doing with IPTV?
We're focusing on YouTube. We think that the YouTube model, the community model, the way in which people can upload, the tools that we've developed, which are called Claim Your Content, which allow you to, if you're a copyright holder, to prevent illegal uploading, that's where we're focused. Yeah, that's fine.
Hi, Tony Rusko, Google Blogscope. I've got some questions regarding localization. Google originally used the Google in Your Language program to translate its interface, and that's probably one of the reasons why it's available in more languages than any other website in the world. Are your more recent products like YouTube being handled in a different way? And if so, is there a future for Google in Your Language?
We're considering it. At the moment, we wanted to get the domains that you saw announced and out. But I think the idea is a good one. Get more and more volunteers to help translate YouTube. Looks like we're losing our audience here. Why don't we make this the final two questions? Yes, sir. And
Igor Karen, my Gmail quota is about 82%. I was wondering if today you had some type of announcement that would relieve me from thinking that I'm going to have to delete some emails.
We don't, but I would suggest that those 20 megabyte PowerPoint files are probably the ones that you should be looking at, but not right now. Go ahead. Yes, ma'am. Why don't we give you the honor of the last question?
DoubleClick acquisition is thought to give you something like 80% of the online advertising market.
That, by the way, is not true.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Please continue.
This answers my question.
That claim was made by Microsoft. So.
I was going to say, from that standpoint, how can you argue it's not a threat to competition? But can you give me your argument from your standpoint?
Well, the statement's not true. The simplest answer is that there are many forms of advertising on the net. DoubleClick is one of the companies. Quantive is another one of them. There's a third one that was just bought by WPP. And each of them has various solutions for what is called display advertising. We're going to, on the assumption our acquisition gets approved, we're going to take DoubleClick and using some technology and make it even more relevant, even more secure, even more private in lots of interesting ways. Looks to me like it's very strong end user benefit, and the market's incredibly competitive. So with that, Rachel, thank you guys very much.
Thanks very much, Eric. That was fantastic.
Yeah.
And thanks